get started. Probably should have looked at it beforehand. Oh, whatever.
Television, comics, novels, video games, modern cinema, one might think differences between writers and the stories they tell would rest on the typical factors often spewed out by critics: pacing, plotting, characterization, etc. But even
What? No, not half that.
modern cinema, one might think differences between writers and the stories they tell would rest on the typical factors often spewed out by critics: pacing, plotting, characterization, etc.
Oh, okay. Now I see what he means. Yeah, pretty much. There's many people who write stories differently, or think one story is better, something or the other.
Television, comics, novels, video games, modern cinema, one might think differences between writers and the stories they tell would rest on the typical factors often spewed out by critics: pacing, plotting, characterization, etc. But even the average audience participant likely can't help but notice a clear and distinct difference between Western and Eastern media. Differences so distinct, in fact, that they've created their own niches amongst consumers. Probably three of the most recognizable of these niches in the West are anime fandoms, kung fu enthusiasts, and the J-horror lovers, while
It's almost like it's a different country where experiences and culture don't overlap.
And let's not even get into the people in the East who are who are all about Western shit.
it's true that all three are industries like comics or animated television shows are here in the West, each tends to be separate from the general consumer and each tends to appeal only to a certain demographic. But
Mm, inherently, but is that a bad thing or something you should specifically? What's the word? Explain? Bring up? Yeah, is something you should specifically bring up because that's a pretty obvious thing to bring up.
So
English is
I
business
mean,
language.
I'm not sure what he means about it tailored to a specific demographic, but like bringing up a Fast and Furious movie is not a good example because they went from fast car movies about family to yeah, Hobbs and Shaw. Uh,
So why is he using? I wouldn't even call these distinctly American, per se, especially since all three of them are action and one of them is a big budget movie film about superheroes. I can,
that
I can, I
everyone
can.
in the world has basically seen at this point.
I mean, if you went to, well, what would you call something an American, a very American product like The Simpsons, Family Guy? I could.
I mean, I guess King of the Hill,
Yeah, I guess so.
but that also ended up getting a Japanese dub, so it means that Japanese people also enjoy it.
Even SpongeBob got a dub, and SpongeBob is popular in America. So I'm guessing if SpongeBob's popular in America, would that make it a very American cartoon? Because would you say anime, quote unquote, is Japanese? Even though anime just means animation, Japanese animation.
I mean, at this point, yeah, but like,
'Cause, I mean, anime is first he's using anime specific, very specifically, which anime itself is not that specific definition. So, well, yeah. All I'm saying is American product is like American, while Japanese product is like Japanese. This is basically what he brought up.
Each tends to appeal only to a certain demographic. But why? Even when a piece of Eastern media manages to break into the Western mainstream and attain mass appeal from general audiences, these
Usually unintelligent and changing science. Oh, usually intelligent and changing science fiction aimed at smart audiences. Why should I care about this Robert Ebert fella? Not to mention, this is his perspective on Ghost in the Shell. So why would I? Why would it matter?
I mean, and let's not forget that there was another Ghost in the Shell movie that was not good. Way more recent than this.
Also, things from other country can easily be popular in other countries. Easily? Well, yeah, let's go with easily. So, saying that people in America like Japanese product, never mind the mainstream, is actually what point is he trying to make here?
each tends to appeal only to a certain demographic. But why? Even when a piece of Eastern media manages to break into the Western mainstream and attain mass appeal from general audiences, these works are distinctly different from the media produced in the West. Yet when you break it down, both
Yes, because it's from a different culture and country. What's the... That should be very obvious. I don't know what he's trying to say here.
tend to utilize the same tropes, a word which here means a significant or reoccurring theme or motif. For example, we can see with movies like Lord of the Rings and The Sorcerer and the White Snake that Western fantasies are just as likely to have brave warriors battling monstrous entities as Eastern fantasies. And we can see from the Hunger Games and Battle Royale or the likes of Apocalypto and the War of the Arrows that we even have similar media with similar premises. Yet, still the differences remain highly apparent. So, what is it that makes Eastern storytelling so noticeably different from Western storytelling? On the surface, there are several notable differences. Let's take a look at two works that help create the foundations of each style, the Odyssey and the Journey to the West. Each work involves a central protagonist embarking on a quest. Each quest involves a long, arduous journey with plenty of interesting adventures, and each work involves heavy divine intervention. The Odyssey's quarrelsome Greek gods and the Journey to the West's rather numerous heavenly deities. The first major difference is also probably the most recognizable and can be summed up in one word: nakama. Nakama is a term that usually tags along with Japanese anime. In short, this refers to the group that the main
I mean, well, this is kind of a nitpick what I'm trying to say, but duh, it's Japanese. What do you mean? Of course, they're gonna say Japanese words in Japan in a Japanese product.
I mean, I'm still just confused of why he's. Oh, why is Eastern storytelling so different from Western storytelling? It's not like they're completely different countries with completely different. Just, I wonder what would be cool to tell stories about.
The first major difference is also probably the most recognizable and can be summed up in one word: nakama. Nakama is a term that usually tags along with Japanese anime. In short, this refers to the group that the main character usually leads. For example, in the show Dragon Ball Z, Son Goku would be the hero and the Z Fighters would be his nakama. Another example would be Goblin Slayer, where the title character
Yeah, I don't know what he's going on with this.
I just also realize this is, well, like I said before, a different language, so there's that. But also, Japan, not Japanese, has pretty interesting language because one word can convey an entire sentence. Usually, I don't know if you guys notice that in Japanese conversation. That's the word. In conversation, but a character can say one word and mean an entire sentence. So yeah, that's also that.
I, I, I still don't know why he's bringing this up when talking about Journey to the West and the Odyssey, because
Not
neither of those stories have the protagonist be alone the whole time.
not to mention this is kind of a generalization of Japanese storytelling, thinking that hey these things, but also this thing and this thing are also doing what these things are doing, which is pretty shallow. Is that the right word? Shallow? Simplistic? Shallow?
Mm, yeah, it's
would be the leader, and the priestess, high elf archer, lizard priest, and dwarf shaman would be his nakama. In
That's literally every storytelling device. Having. First off, you gotta explain what nakama is, since that's a Japanese word. And you don't expect someone from a different language to know what the hell nakama means. I mean, he's trying now, but uh, the actual definition would be nice. Oh wait, that's not how it works. Since it's a different language, it would be a translation of the language. So you could just give me a translation of the word or sentence. That would be pretty nice.
no, yeah, and like Goblin Slayer is not a good example because the main character is a psychopath and he's and his quote unquote team are just
The work
more.
buddies, you could say. Okay, maybe not work buddies. The point is, Goblin Slayer from Goblin Slayer is very messed up in the head. Yeah, needs a therapist.
Journey to the West, the main character is the great monk Tripitaka, aka Tang Xuanchang, with Sun Wukong the Monkey King, Pigsy the greedy pig monster, and Sandy the mischievous river spirit being his nakama. Now, it could be technically argued that the Odyssey's leading man, Odysseus, has a nakama too, since he is the leader of a great many soldiers, and I suppose that would be technically correct, given that despite the belief that nakama refers to a group of close friends,
Oh, now you're gonna explain it. You don't. Whatever.
culturally, it's more accurate to describe a nakama as a group of people working together to accomplish the same goal. So, in essence, a squad of soldiers would be nakama to one another, and so Odysseus's men could count as his nakama too. However, here's why that wouldn't fit. Narratively speaking, each member of a nakama is special and unique. They tend to have skills and fleshed out personalities that either support or contrast with the lead character. So, more
S. But you just gave a meaning. But you said. You just gave the meaning, but said. But it also is. So we're just adding meaning. We're adding another mean. Wait. We're adding more meaning to the definition you brought up. This is not. That's not. That's not
Well,
how
you
it.
see, these would count as under the definition, but I don't want it to. So here's an additional part of it that I forgot to mention.
Just because other things do it doesn't mean the definition changes. The correlation It's just correlation. This is not right. This is not fair, dog.
More than a crew of nameless soldiers. They tend to fall into a trope called the five-man band. While the archetypes and number may vary, the core members are the leader, the lancer, the smart guy, the big guy, and the chick, or the heart if you want to be more politically correct and boring, and you're the type of person people tend to ignore at parties. The leader is the main hero, the lancer is the hero's contrast, the smart guy is in charge of knowing things, the big guy is of course the team's muscle, and the chick helps keep the balance, quelling aggression, keeping up morale, and making sure the team stays together. Now compare this to the Odyssey, where Odysseus has a following of soldiers, but no special companions. It's just Odysseus alone, with a group of men who follow him out of sworn duty rather than a sense of companionship or rivalry. In fact, by the end, Odysseus is alone, having lost all of his men, but their losses are treated more like ways to ramp up the sense of danger for Odysseus, rather than for character drama. In contrast, the loss of even one member in Journey to the West would be a heartbreaking experience. The audience develops a special connection to members of a Nakama because they tend to be fully developed characters, while the only one in the Odyssey meant for the audience to connect with is Odysseus. The second biggest is probably a lesser known trope, but likely still recognizable to
So you're saying Nakama is a trope?
So I mention something about Journey to the West?
You should bring it up. Yes.
So he was talking about, oh man, if one of the people was lost, it would be a tragic heart thing or whatever. But like, if I recall, Sun Wukong is being forced to help Tanzang. He, the only reason he helped protect him is because if he doesn't help, the like band on his head will kill him. And since he's immortal, he'll just keep dying. And
But
I
but that's he's a standout character. He has his own motives because he's in conflict with other characters. So he has a personality and so on.
I don't remember what the river guy's deal was, but I remember the pig one just tried to eat the priest.
Nevertheless, this is you. This is not. This video is not going well.
the anime faithful, enemies becoming a lesser known trope, but likely still recognizable to the anime faithful, enemies becoming companions. Dragon Ball Z and even the original Dragon Ball are famous for this, since most of Goku's friends were enemies at one time.
Okay, what does he mean this isn't common?
Shonen. He's referring to shonen. No, not referring to shonen. What am I saying? He's referring to common knowledge because Big Thing did it, and therefore, Japanese product does it. This is basically what he's saying. Big Thing did it, so other things must do it.
Hmm. I can think of like a couple examples of quote unquote Western media also doing this. So I don't get his point.
Well, like he said earlier, they're Japanese inspired, which is okay. It's not like Japan can be inspired by American products, or something that looks like an inspiration could just been total coincidence, but that's looking a little. Uh, this this is not a good point.
Even his first friend, Bulma, introduced herself by shooting Goku in the face, but this is also a fairly common trope. The series Yu Yu Hakusho
What?
has Yusuke Urameshi
So people that they didn't that I mean, pretty much everything can be boiled down to a trope if you try, but what's the point of saying that was a trope when you're not going to explain it?
I'm not even sure which part he means is the common trope. Meeting someone and immediately shooting them? Or
That would be a fair judgment, considering he didn't explain himself.
team up with two demons, Hiei and Kurama, two demons he previously battled. He also teams up with longtime school rival Kuwabara. And yes, this trope also exists in Journey to the West. Tripitaka gets Monkey King as a freebie, but Pigsy and Sandy start off as enemies when Monkey and Tripitaka first encounter them. It's only after a vicious battle and some divine intervention that these enemies eventually become companions. Now contrast this to the Odyssey. Odysseus encounters many enemies
I'm just keep on throwing myself back into the video because he's saying this thing did different, but this other thing did it different, which is okay. But are we saying that Odysseus? I mean, the Odyssey and Journey to the West is storytelling because there could have just there are there okay, let's say there are stories that came before the Odyssey and Journey to the West, and stories after that could be more influential than those two. So it,
hmm.
it, it's different. I I don't really see the
Oh,
purpose of this video apart from saying how different they are, because
oh yeah, I'm just remembering this. The Epic of Gilgamesh. Enkidu was made to try and kill him. They duke it out, become bros.
even yeah,
And that's like the oldest story.
rivals becoming friends is not a unique thing in Japanese storytelling. If that's what he's trying to imply, which I think that's what he's trying to imply.
And if he's trying to imply that, the Odyssey isn't a good thing because the at some point they end up on an island with a witch, and she's like, after staying on the island, she's just like, you know, you're a pretty cool guy. I'm gonna let you leave.
Not to mention how naive that sounds, saying Japan does it, therefore American products must be inspired by specifically Journey to the West, which he might be, it might be implying.
throughout his long journey home, but none of those enemies become his companion. As is common with Western protagonists, Odysseus remains the lone hero, with tertiary characters existing for a singular purpose or treated more like fodder for drama and tension. There's
I mean, doesn't Journey to the West do that?
Yeah,
Right.
because like I'm recalling an exact situation where it's like Sun Wukong is on the job and keeps killing this one demon over and over who keeps trying to trick the monk.
Oh shoot! I got
Everyone else is like,
one moment,
hey,
please.
okay.
Sorry about that. I'm back.
Oh yeah, so basically Wukong is going and it keeps attacking this demon who's trying to trick them. The demon eventually turns into a woman and they're like, Wukong, stop attacking the pretty lady. What's wrong with you? And they tell him to fuck off. Surprise, surprise, it's a demon. They're about to get eaten, and he comes back and saves them.
Actually, that's not. I don't think that's comparable since that's a reoccurring villain.
Well, I mean, it's only like, it's not even that long of the story. It's basically just a side plot.
I wonder if you're gonna bring up side plots then.
Never a part where Odysseus fights and befriends a Lotus Eater, and Polyphemus doesn't become Odysseus' rival only to join forces later to escape the clutches of Charybdis, and Circe doesn't become the spunky magical girl who constantly insults Odysseus while secretly pining for him.
Oh, okay. Now we're just. Come on, come on. That's just. Now you're just ascribing. Well, first
He's,
off, I had to
he's
know
just
if
this.
these have to know these characters' personalities, but nevertheless, this hypothetical doesn't seem too fair since you're most likely associating these with quote unquote typical personalities or nakama in popular anime that you looked at.
Yeah, he was just implanting quote unquote generic anime roles onto them.
It just doesn't happen. And these appear to be two distinct differences between how Western creatives write and how Eastern creatives write. However, neither difference is unique to Eastern writing. Most Western television shows have a cast of characters surrounding a
Why did
main
you bring it? Did you just did he just bring this up because Odyssey does thing and Journey of the West does other thing? Because if that's not the point of you bringing up that, then why did you bring up that?
Because they're popular.
Because I don't.
lead. For example, Scrubs, the medical dramedy, stars Dr. John Dorian, who's the
I really like Scrubs. I don't really remember much of it, especially since it was like 3 years ago since I last seen it. But I do recommend Scrubs.
It's on Hulu, I think. So yeah, it's a watch.
Go watch Scrubs, y'all. It's pretty good.
then supported by a colorful cast of characters with intriguing personalities. While one might not classify their relationship as nakama per se, other Western shows like 24 and NCIS have their respective casts.
From the definition of a nakama that you brought up and your examples, they are very much like nakama. So I don't know
They
what.
are they are co-workers who spend all their time near each other, so they might as well get to know each other.
That too. So yeah, by the definition that you brought up, they are nakama. You just kind of lied right there.
And like using the Scrubs example, two of the people in the picture hate the quote unquote main character.
The two on the top left, beside the black guy, their names elude me.
Yeah, the guy in the middle is a janitor. He's just a dick.
Well, to be fair, he main guy started it, and it just stumbled into the relationship. It's a not exactly episodic, but it's kind of
There's some continuity,
yeah.
but not enough that you would miss much.
Their episodic characteristics. I guess that's what it's trying to say.
say. Other Western shows like 24 and NCIS have their respective casts fall securely beneath the Nakama umbrella. The Expendables trilogy is a perfect example of Nakama appearing in Western media, with Barney Ross acting as a lead and the remaining cast acting as his Nakama. Also, old enemies becoming companions isn't exactly unique to Eastern media either, at least not anymore, with one of the coolest examples being Deckard
So
Shaw from
why
the
would
Fast
you mention it, fucko?
He didn't say it outright, but this only strengthens my argument that he's trying to say Journeys of the West is Eastern product, while the Odyssey is Western, and everything falls under that. I don't. I don't know that. Just had a little chat with someone else in the room, but yeah. Uh, like I said, he's trying to say the East has Journey to the West. How do I say this faster? Odyssey is American story writing, and Journey to the West is Japanese story writing, which is not true. Well, I mean, it's
I
not
mean,
fair because, things can be written differently from Journey to the West and can still be considered American.
actually, why? If we're being technical, the Odyssey isn't even quote unquote Western because Greece is on the Eastern Hemisphere.
And the Odyssey is very Eastern because of Cyclopses and Centurions. Uh, glad, well, okay, not gladiators, but yeah.
and Furious series, a Western-born movie franchise. Shaw entered the scene as an antagonist, but later allied himself with the main crew. The movie Hobbs and Shaw wouldn't have been possible without the essential change of heart. But if tropes like these don't make the definitive difference between the two styles, then what does? The answer might be found in the difference between
There isn't. Oh, he did bring it up. I was gonna say. I was gonna say tropes. I okay. What I meant to say is what I meant to say that tropes don't make up this storytelling.
So this was 7 minutes of preamble before getting to the actual point. Got it.
A good point, anyways. Oh wait, no. He's like I said before. Before he didn't say it, but it's most likely from what he's explaining. But now he's actually saying something definitive.
But if tropes like these don't make the definitive difference between the two styles, then what does? The answer might be found in the difference between cultural philosophies. But what does that mean exactly? Well, because storytelling has changed and evolved over the centuries, it could mean a number of things. For example, a good place to look for modern differences would arguably be Death Note. On one hand, the original anime/manga series is so respected and adored due to its intriguing concept, clever writing, and powerful characterization that it became one of the few Japanese works to skyrocket.
Gotta go again. Looks like I'll be having to trim this down in a video editor.
Into the American mainstream. On the series is so respected and adored due to its intriguing concept, clever writing, and powerful characterization that it became one of the few Japanese works to skyrocket into the American mainstream. On the other hand, due to its popularity, we now have a Western adaptation thanks to Netflix. Now, quality aside, there were some significant changes done to Death Note's story that gave the film a distinctly American feel. Even if I were to compare the Netflix live-action movie to the Japanese live-action version of Death Note, a viewer might still notice that one film has a more American Western structure, and the other is more noticeably Japanese. And yes, that's regardless of cinematography or the fact that the actors are clearly speaking different languages. One of the first noticeable differences is how the two cultures seem to portray smart protagonists. The character of Light Yagami in the Japanese version, is defined by his high intelligence. And the same could technically be said for the Netflix's version of Light Turner for Western audiences. But that's where things change lanes into common American cliché. See, when it comes to intelligent high school protagonists in Western media, there seems to be only one dedicated mold. The awkward.
Wait, he used, I already forgot the word. Cliche, yeah. He used the word cliche, which you can't use that to describe things when you're trying to say cliches don't make the Western or Eastern product. It's just a paradox in his writing.
Nerd. Netflix's Light Turner was considered highly intelligent, at least by the movie's standards, but he was portrayed in the only fashion modern Western writers can portray a smart high school.
Yeah, I thought so. Alright. I shouldn't have to say this, but the movie is a bad adaptation.
That's weird.
Slash, well, at least I heard it wasn't written well. So apart from the adaptation and the quality of the writing, this is not a cliche. Itself is not a cliche. It's
So
both
because of
a cliche and bad writing.
yeah, so because it's Western and he's just not as smart as it is, like
protagonist. He's physically weak, he's socially awkward, he's a coward who eagerly walks away from his ambitions the moment things get tough. He acts out of submission, wanting to give people what they want, rather than acting out of dominance, working to impose his will on the world and recreate it in his own image. And he's willing to throw all caution to the wind because
that's just a character change, like I said. They changed the character. Like the name thing. The name thing doesn't have any. I presume it doesn't have any significance in the overall character or storytelling. So changing that is Americanizing, but for what you described, that's just a character change.
a girl paid him the slightest bit of attention. They are commonly written without masculine traits or any sense of real confidence. In comparison, modern Japanese works allow smart protagonists to fall into several molds. One might point out the reclusively ugly super nerds, also referred to as NEETs, not in education, employment, or training, a very lowly person in Japanese society. While these characters may be nerdy when pertaining to their standard obsession with some form of chosen media, their reservoir of knowledge and the height of their intelligence is usually relegated to their said obsessions. In other words, they aren't necessarily smart and are often even characterized as foolish or stupid for wasting their lives and not working to achieve their potential. The next kind is the
This is also an American thing, because you just defined like characters from Bully. The first thing that comes to my mind is characters in the video game Bully by Rockstar. So,
I don't know why he believes that American media don't have archetypes.
Well, he just brought up that too, but he just brought up an image from Bully. So how does he not know that it's not a Japanese exclusive thing?
brainy nerd. These types are usually lacking in muscle but are hyper-competent in various technical skills. They are usually accompanied by a device like a laptop or a robot. This category of intelligent protagonist is pretty close to the American high school nerd archetype. Knowledgeable, likely has good grades, and eagerness to please, socially awkward, and not particularly handsome or beautiful. Though they are prone to being portrayed as cute, if you're into that sort of thing. So in short, this is where Light Turner would likely be sorted, except without the hyper-competence. Light Yagami would fall under this next category, the top student. I'll come back to this in a bit, but in Western media, the popular kids are often stereotyped as athletes and cheerleaders, and they maintain their popularity through sheer physical achievement. They're not necessarily smart. In fact, they're quite often portrayed as exceptionally stupid. But in Japanese media, the most popular student tends to be the top overachiever. The student who makes the top grades, is a ranking member of the student council, while also being athletic, has some level of social competence, and is physically attractive. So Light Yagami isn't alone here. He's joined by the likes of Kurama from Yu Yu Hakusho, Seto Kaiba from Yu-Gi-Oh!, Angel from Angel Beats, and pretty much every guy who's ever dramatically pushed up his glasses. To summarize, Light Turner's intelligence places him on the bottom of the social ladder in Western society, while
What?
Light Turner's intelligence places him on the bottom of the social ladder in Western society, while Light Yagami's intelligence places him at the top of Eastern society. Why might that be? This specific example is only surface level, but I wanted to point it out because it also feeds right back into a core philosophical difference between the East and the West. To better illustrate what I mean, let's move away from Japanese media.
Well, I can't really say this for the Japanese culture, but it's a, like you said, stereotype. But hopefully you heard the phrase, smart people rule the world. The nerd you bullied would be your boss in the future. So, yeah, it's not specifically, well, in terms of popularity, from what he said, in terms of popularity, but overall, smart people usually dominate.
Something, the high school prom king peaked.
Not to mention he brought up, well, no, nah.
And head right back to the arena of Chinese cinema. In the sequel to Ip Man, our hero faces off against a monstrous British boxer named Twister. Ip Man uses the style and finesse of Wing Chun against Twister's aggressive boxing techniques and overwhelming brute strength. This match perfectly highlights a root difference between the philosophy of the West and the philosophy of the East. And this match between Ip Man and Twister is not an isolated event. A similar match takes place.
No, I mean, it could be viewed like that, but it's not point by point Western versus Eastern. Like it's one part Western and the other guy is one part Eastern, because
I mean,
some
that's just how fighting styles work. Some of them are different from others.
it's a pretty skin deep to describe this guy as the West and that guy as the East, point blank. Because I don't know,
Because
In Rocky, what's his name? Apollo Creed. He's a smart fighter. He's also smart outside of the ring. Is he a Eastern boxer, or, well, not an Eastern boxer, but a blank boxer, because he doesn't fit into the brute strength boxer type? Because that's kind of what he's saying.
and bringing up the Greeks real quick, they didn't they like invent wrestling?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yes, they did.
Yeah, that's like a mix of both, because you have to both outmaneuver and outweigh your opponent.
sumo wrestling was constructed, but sumo could have been a byproduct of wrestling in old. Um, the name eludes me again. Dude, am I? Do I have some sort of Alzheimer's? Greek, old Greece time. Yeah.
In Jet Li's Fearless, a somewhat isolated event. A similar match takes place in Jet Li's Fearless, a somewhat historical movie which follows the story of martial arts legend Hu Young-jia. He eventually faces off against a Western fighter called Hercules O'Brien, and again, just like with Ip Man, Hu Young-jia must use the skill and finesse of wushu to defeat the overwhelming power of O'Brien's sheer brute force. And this difference isn't just relegated to movies, it's consistent with
Also, I believe is also no, not that I've seen those, but it could also be viewed as the weak, the weak, the small but intelligent Eastern overtaking the superpower brutes of the West, because that's a pretty common thing in other countries where the West is some sort of big super bad guy with usually little intelligence going up with a smarter underdog type. Or the other way around, where meek, foolish American versus the superior in every way countrymen. But yeah, that's just one way to show an example.
with historical events as well. One of the most
And it's gonna bring up that. At least I tried to bring up that, but whatever.
notable events being the arrival of the Black Ships. The Black Ships were actually an attempt by the United States to once again open trade with Japan after over 200 years of relative isolation. Politics and reasons aside, this code of isolation left Japan to its own ends, which meant it was left with its status quo of tradition. Perry's arrival was so earth-shattering because with him came great technological advancements and the unyielding muscle of industry. The arrival of Western influence was such a sharp and crucial change for Japan that it would help spark a war between the shogunate and its desire to preserve tradition and the imperial loyalists with their desire for change. So how does this all fit together? In the West, Light Turner's intelligence placed him at the bottom of the social ladder, while athletes and cheerleaders are typically placed at the top due to physical achievement. In the East, Light Yagami's intelligence alone earns him respect, raising his status on the social ladder, keeping in mind that his physical capabilities, tennis and fighting, are only really showcased once each throughout this series. From what we see in how the other students and adults revere Light, most of his popularity stems from his intellect. When
Yeah, because it's a thinky show. But, it's a kung fu and boxing. Not to mention, boxing takes some intelligence. So this is you're putting two and two. You're trying to put two and two together, but you're ending up making a mess here, since boxing is, not to mention, is a different franchise that doesn't have to follow under the ideals of strength is lesser than intelligence. It's not. It's not. I'm not trying to say he's more or less wrong, but though I don't think it's comparable, kung fu show to. What am I trying to say here? I guess I don't have anything to refute that. Oh well.
when Ip Man and Hu Yangjia face off against the Western fighters, it's a battle involving the spiritual discipline of Chinese martial arts versus the physical discipline of Western boxing. Also note that the greatest Eastern fighters are often portrayed as gurus, respected more for the wisdom they gained through their practice of martial arts, while the greatest Western fighters are portrayed as skilled athletes, respected for their physical capabilities, with intelligence and wisdom being a bonus if present at all. And if anyone has seen Fearless, Hu Yanjia was a great fighter, but only delivered the change to the world that would make him a legend after achieving spiritual harmony, aka achieving enlightenment. This calls back to the ideals of Buddhism and Confucianism, both religions that heavily influenced the East and which both center around finding one's personal path to enlightenment or adhering to ideals such as humaneness and filial piety. You see hints of this when looking back at kung fu movies. Mastering martial arts isn't really the goal, it's more of a vehicle towards self-improvement, a way to balance one's mind and body. Now compare this to Catholicism, a religion that dominated the West. While self-improvement is also a goal, in the center lies a central conflict in the form of hell.
Well, currently he's not saying anything I can disprove. If anything, he should have started with this, because yeah, the thing with the Journey to the West and the Odyssey was not smart to ascribe, because that's not how storytelling works.
And Satan, the eternal adversary, who cheats at cards. One is driven to do good with the consequence of eternal damnation and torture should they fail to resist Satan's constant temptations. Now compare the Eastern philosophy to the American action movie, where main characters use combat, gunplay, and the occasional car fu to squash the bad guy. Whatever happens over the course of the movie, whatever the main character goes through, everything is done to come out as the dominant force in the story's overarching issue, to stop the terrorist, to save the beautiful damsel, to get revenge against the guy who killed your dog. But again, what does this all mean exactly? And more importantly, what does this all have to do with storytelling? One of the core differences between a Western story and an Eastern story is how the West and the East view the role of conflict. Let's go back to the Odyssey and Journey to the West.
Yes.
The Odyssey is the story of Odysseus overcoming various obstacles to eventually return home before the suitors steal away both his wife and his entire kingdom. In the Journey to the West, the journey being referred to in the title isn't a journey to defeat a great enemy, rescue damsels, or topple an empire. The journey is a pilgrimage begun by Buddha to deliver his sutras to the land of the South, aka Tang China, where the people have become greedy and hedonistic. While that might sound like a pressing conflict, the story doesn't present it as one. These people may
Like what King said, even what he's describing now, the religious aspect seems to play a lot in Journey to the West, while in the Odyssey is more of a selfish, contained into one person's story. It's a man's achievements / goals. Not to mention the fact that it's a Roman story, so this isn't even an American thing, strictly. Which currently he's strictly using American and Japanese products, which yes, they fall under North and East, but both are not just the North or the East. I'm not sure what they're trying to imply there.
have grown sinful, but they aren't holding anyone hostage. They aren't trying to carry out a nefarious plot that puts a timer on the heroes. There's not an evil ancient prophecy foretelling some great calamity that will befall the world if these people don't receive the teachings of Buddha. It was just an instance of Buddha seeing some troubled people and wanting to rectify that. In other words, there is an overarching problem, but no overarching conflict. The structure
I mean, the conflict is that if they don't get over there, then yeah.
I guess he's right, but it's still a conflict. they still have conflict in their duties.
Developed by the German novelist Gustav Freytag, now known and wanting to rectify that. In other words, there is an overarching problem, but no overarching conflict. The structure developed by the German novelist Gustav Freytag, now known as Freytag's Triangle, is one of the most recognizable structures for Western storytelling. It begins with exposition to set the scene, then an incident to spark the story's conflict, then we're led to the
Wait, so you're now using German a German story graft to. I'm trying to say different race for an American.
So like this is an important like learning thing for just like basic I want to write a story, but you don't have to follow it exactly, which is nobody does.
Maybe if he's trying to say basic American storytelling, which would be fine, since some people try to write things as easily as possible. Some people just do it easy, and so they just use other stories to make their stories. But this is not a. It's kind of unfair to say this is American storytelling rather than just simple American storytellings, because Journey to the West is also a story, and you don't see. Well, Dragon Ball is pretty simple storytelling, so yeah. And once, wow, cliches. Yeah, it's just a cliche.
rising action, a complication, then we reach the story's climax, then a reversal of fortune followed by the falling action as the conflict dies down, leading finally to denouement. Now let's look at one of the most recognizable Eastern storytelling structures, Kisho Tenketsu. Western and Eastern stories feel so different from each other, finally led to the conflict. The structure developed by the German novelist Gustav Freytag, now known as Freytag's Triangle, is one of the most recognized to spark the story's conflict.
Said one of the in American, and opening he said one of the in Japanese. All right, I'm just making sure you didn't say the as in definitive.
Leading finally to denouement. Now let's look at one of the most recognizable Eastern storytelling structures, Kisho Tenketsu. Western and Eastern stories feel so different from each other because it isn't just about what tropes they use or how they develop their characters. They are written with completely different techniques and are different right down to the foundation. And this difference has become more blatant as each style developed over time, with emphasis on physical capability and or aggression being the top valued traits in Western heroes, traits that are well suited for the Western story structure. Kisho Tenketsu is a four-part structure. Ki, the introduction, paints the setting. Sho, development, a part that provides a small change and adds detail which leads into the next act. Ten, the twist, a major unexpected development. This is where the climax would be. Finally, Ketsu, the conclusion. This is where any dangling plots are tied up and the story heads towards its ending. Here's a quick example.
Okay,
Ki,
pause.
introduction.
Yes.
So that's basically the same thing as the Western diagram, because it starts, things are introduced as it goes up, the big climax happens, then it slows down and ends.
The twists doesn't have to be a climactic question mark. But
Well, I mean, you know what I mean. It's like it starts, goes up, then goes down.
the climax, de-escalation. Yes, pretty much the same. But I guess the small nuances of each story just makes it different enough. Is maybe he'll bring that up.
I mean, the small nuances exist because people are unique and write different things.
Yeah.
Which I'm surprised he hasn't mentioned.
Yeah. Well, he's trying to quantify Western and Western and Eastern storytelling. So, what can I say? He has an uphill battle to do.
A father finds that his family needs more food and goes out to the grocery store. Show. Development. Wife tells him to take a can of pepper spray since it is a dangerous neighborhood at night. 10. Twist. Father returns home to find family murdered. Ketsu. Conclusion. Father finds killer still in the house, pepper sprays his eyes, and manages to defeat him. The last shot ends with the police arriving. Not the happiest of stories, but while there are things that appear like evidence of a central conflict, if you look closely, there isn't one. Here's how this story might go if you told it using Freytag's triangle, or adapting it for a Western audience. Exposition. Introduce the family, the father, and the bad neighborhood setting. Inciting incident. The electricity goes out. Rising action. Father hears his wife scream, followed by a gunshot. Complication. Wife is murdered by an intruder. Children have been taken hostage. Man is a loan shark come to steal enough money to repay a loan.
No, not really. He could just easily do this all by himself. It doesn't have to be like that. It could just be. You could just have. You could just find like an entire arsenal of weapons and try to one-man army his way through it. So it doesn't have to be that specific. That's what I'm saying. Because we're trying to be as bare bones as possible in this exclamation. I guess that this is a nitpick, but take what you will from this.
The wife had taken out without the father's knowledge. Climax. Father faces off against the intruder while trying to keep children alive. Reversal of fortune. One child gets shot, possibly dies. Falling action. Father summons the last bit of his strength to finally overpower the intruder, gets the gun, and shoots the man in the head. Denouement. Intruder is dead. The police arrive. The child who was shot is taken to the hospital for possible recovery, and the story ends with the sun rising while the father and the remaining child look on. Western plots are built off a central conflict, whether it be in fighting off a home invader, trying to romance a special someone before they're arranged to be married, or trying to find that perfect summer adventure before school starts next week. In other words, the pacing and overall structure tend to be far more aggressive than the Eastern structure, and
when I think about this, it's kind of like what's the word? A linear plot telling versus episodic? Because Eastern sounds more episodic, while the Western example sounds like a linear storytelling.
And back to the whole different writers just do different things. It's not like Eastern writers don't decide, hey, let's have a central conflict. Or Western writers decide, hey, let's not.
I think he's trying to say the typical writing, because, well, I say that, but he didn't bring up typical Japanese writing that follow a key show. I forget what it's called. The key show thing.
Maybe he'll bring it up after this. Who knows?
this is a tradition that hails back to the plays of ancient Greece. The structure of a Greek tragedy was traditionally set in one place over the course of one day and set with one main plot, a formula perfectly portrayed by the infamous Oedipus Rex. Exposition. Chorus sings of Oedipus, king of Thebes, who defeated the Sphinx and married Jocasta, the widowed wife of the murdered king Laius. Now Thebes has been stricken by various misfortunes, a curse from the gods. Inciting incident. Creon, brother of Oedipus's wife Jocasta, returns returns from the Oracle of Delphi and delivers the gods' ultimatum that the misfortune of Thebes will continue until the murderer of Laius has been discovered and punished. Rising action. Tiresias, the blind prophet of Apollo, reluctantly reveals that Oedipus is both Laius's murderer and committing incest. Tensions grow between Creon and Oedipus since it was Creon who suggested that they listen to Tiresias in the first place. Jocasta explains that a prophet foretold that Laius was destined to die by his son, which didn't happen since she and Laius had their son killed. Coincidentally, there was a similar prophecy told that Oedipus would kill his father and marry his mother. Laius was murdered near the Oracle.
Okay, I'll be honest. I'm tuning this all the way out.
And you should, because this isn't even how the plot went. Like, he's pointing out all this shit out of order just to make his point that
Is he now? That would be a big issue in this video.
yeah, because at literature class we had to read Oedipus Rex.
God.
The prophecy of, hey, your son's going to kill your wife and kill you and marry your wife was the first thing that they discover, which is why they try and kill the son.
Of Delphi. She points this out to argue that prophets aren't always to be trusted. Oedipus unfortunately recognizes the location and begins to doubt his own innocence. Since the physically capable Oedipus happened to have killed a bunch of men at that exact spot around that exact time. Thing is, the surviving servant from the time said it was a group of robbers who killed Laius and not a single man. Then, to further discredit the power of prophecy, Polybus, Oedipus's father, has died of natural causes and not by the hand of Oedipus. At this time, Oedipus celebrates that the power of prophecy isn't as absolute as they once thought. Complication. Messenger reveals that Polybus and Merope are not Oedipus's parents, and that they took him in after a herdsman rescued him from the woods. Climax. Jocasta, knowing that Laius had left her son to die in those same woods, realizes that Oedipus was in fact her son. Reversal of fortune. Jocasta hangs herself. Following action, Oedipus blinds himself and leaves Thebes in exile since he had indeed killed Laius, his father, and married Jocasta, his mother. Denouement. Oedipus goes into exile and Creon succeeds him as king. Neat and tidy. One day, one location, one plot stemming from one central conflict. So, how would the story of Oedipus Rex look if run through the Kisho Tenketsu formula? Step 1. Let's remove the central conflict from the equation, which means the plagues of Thebes are no longer in play. Key. Introduction. Oedipus is the respected king of Thebes after solving the riddle of the Sphinx. Life is good, despite Oedipus's dark, brooding past. Show. Development. Tiresias, blind prophet of Apollo, has passed, but in his
Yeah, this is necessary for the for information's sake, but geez, I really am not following too well. I regret to say I'm tuning this stuff out.
Yeah, man really should have just had a TLDR.
Maybe I'm not certain, but I can't say from this point on. I'm giving a genuine review. Of not well. This is a genuine review. What's the word? A fair review? A very cognitive review, considering I'm very.
dying words reveals that Laius, the previous king of Thebes, who people believe had been killed by robbers, was actually murdered by Oedipus. Oedipus rejects the accusation and vows to discover the true identity of Laius's murderer. Jocasta, once wife to Laius, now married to Oedipus, dismisses these concerns by saying that Laius was prophesied to be murdered by his son, but was killed.
Okay, considering how big of an exclamation he's doing, this is. This is kind of just the story. I think he's just saying the story. Because this key show thing just sounds like a condensed version of the story. I think. I think. I don't think I should say anything more past this until the next points.
You want to just skip to when he has all the things up because I really don't see a difference in the original plot.
I guess this is for the best. The Kisho Tenketsu.
Structure
Okay,
absent of
so
it flees into
he,
exile. Kisho
nothing different happened. All that changed was, hey, no plague.
Because, yeah, the Kisho Kentetsu kind of just removes. It kind of just removes one detail from the. What did he call it? The German guy's thing. Whatever. I didn't. I don't remember the name. The Freytag's triangle. It just sounds like he just removed one detail from the Freytag's triangle.
concludes into exile. Kisho Tenketsu is a writing structure absent of inherent conflict. While conflict can certainly be present in a story written in this style, it isn't necessary. In other words, this formula allows a writer to center the story around other elements. This is probably why the slice of life genre, where the topic of the story follows a character or characters as they go around an ordinary day, has more or less been dominated by anime and manga, and those trying to emulate its style. It might also be why the beach episode has become a well-known staple in anime culture, because when a central conflict exists as the absolute center of your story, every major element must connect to that conflict in some way. In effect, your characters, villains, twists, and turns become vehicles for the plot's progression. For example, the city of Thebes has been cursed by plague. How is this resolved? Terrorists have taken over a building filled with valuables in order to steal them. How is this resolved? An evil, oppressive empire has taken over the galaxy far, far away. How is this resolved? With the Kisho Tenketsu story.
Yeah, like I said earlier, this sounds episodic and linear, and the Japan, the usual Japanese in the usual Japanese products enjoys a more episodic tale. Is what I guess he's trying to say, but he didn't use the word episodic or. Also, he's using primarily movies, while movies for American products. While actually not primarily, he's singularly using American movies, while he brought up movies and shows for Japan. Because I don't.
Yeah,
Oh wait, no, he
like
used Scrubs. He used Scrubs. I forgot about that moment. He used the television show Scrubs, 24 Hours. Okay, I was a little wrong there.
yeah, but you think he have more examples, like more diverse examples to have out,
Maybe
but
the
then
example. I guess his
that
examples
would
should be good.
invalidate his point or whatever.
Structure, conflict, along with other elements, can become a vehicle for something else. A hero has devoted his life to slaying goblins, despite the job being lowly and beneath most adventurers. What drives a man to do this? A hero reaches power beyond measure and becomes a powerful anomaly within his own universe. How does he deal with this, and how does the world deal with him? A young prodigy finds a notebook that can kill anyone whose name is written inside. How does he react? Of course, it could be argued that each of these anime series has a deep central conflict, with Death Note reaching legendary status due to the
Yeah, it wasn't it like Light versus L. Isn't that the central conflict, right? In Death Note.
Well, at some point, but at first it's mostly not getting caught for all of this. once they start finding out.
Driving cat-and-mouse conflict between Light and L. But what might happen if the central conflict were taken from Star Wars? The central conflict being that the Empire was an oppressive tyrannical force, whose constant push for absolute dominance in the galaxy caused them to create a superweapon known as the Death Star, and, in turn, caused the rebellion to steal plans of said Death Star, which caused the Empire to pursue the rebels, which caused the notable rebel agent Princess Leia to send a call for aid along with the Death Star plans to a small desert planet where an old ally lived, which then caused the Empire to destroy the home of Luke Skywalker, which pushed him into action. In other words, the central conflict in the original Star Wars is the tyranny of the Empire. Replace a tyrannical empire with a just one, and without the tyranny, any rebellion would likely be less powerful. It probably wouldn't build a powerful superweapon like the Death Star unless their hand had been forced by a dangerous hostile power. And without this conflict, Luke Skywalker may have lived out his days on a lonely desert planet. In short, the story falls apart. Now let's take a look at Death Note. The conflict that the series is known for involves the mental clash between the great detective L and Light Yagami, the killer with a god complex. But what would happen if L never existed? Light still takes possession of the Death Note, but there's no one in the world that could challenge its exceptional intellect. The story would definitely change, but the central premise would have been the same. What would a genius with a god complex do with the power of life and death? Light could have encountered faceless leaders of shadow governments. He could have gone up against terrorist organizations who used codenames, and the same goes for each listed example. Die Hard would be nothing without Hans Gruber's takeover of Nakatomi Tower, but Goblin Slayer's story could still exist without goblins, because in Goblin Slayer, the focus actually isn't the goblin slaying, it's the character of Goblin Slayer. It's the world they live in and how the world reacts when there's a hero like Goblin Slayer who doesn't idolize glory or gold, a hero who combats the troubles of the common people when he doesn't have to or can pursue greater things. That's the true story of Goblin.
Kind of a oversimplification, but I think that's correct. I don't remember much of Goblin Slayer. I have seen it, but, or maybe, yeah, that's what I have to say.
Well, like, to answer his question, if goblins did exist, he would have just grown up on a farm. Because, like, goblins coming to attack is why he's so aggro against goblins.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to make. You should have said if they replace goblins with blank, but that could have been said with the Die Hard example if they replaced the main antagonist there with something else, like a bank robber or a super thief. I think.
Slayer. And despite the intriguing story of Oedipus, there would likely have been no story at all had the gods not cursed the land of Thebes. The plagues sparked the investigations. The plagues brought Oedipus to force Tiresias' hand and spill his secrets. There would be no question to the murder of Laius, and Polybus's death would have simply been both a relief and a sad occasion for Oedipus, but no revelation or connection to the events of divine prophecy. The great tragedy would have likely never been realized. Again, the story would fall apart. And finally, the story of One Punch Man is
said likely, not it wouldn't. So you kind of contradicting yourself there. Because with the Star Wars examples was pretty straightforward and definitive, while you just said likely here. Though I shouldn't really say much since I wasn't paying attention to his exclamation of Odysseus. What? Oedipus Rex, not Odysseus Rex.
conflict between his enemies or the self-absorbed elite heroes that inhabit the world. It's Saitama's own internal struggle, dealing with his power, his loss of humanity, and his place in the world. So, taking everything into account, maybe a more accurate description to expose the difference between these two styles wouldn't necessarily be that one has conflict and the other one doesn't, but rather Western stories are suited to explore the external struggle, while Eastern stories are suited to explore the internal struggle. And this isn't to say that one style is good and the other bad, and it isn't even to suggest that one structure is better than the other. And of course, there exists quite a bit of overlap, and there will always be exceptions to every norm. But when you look at the way Western and Eastern philosophies developed, and how their cultures developed around them, it becomes a little easier to see why creative works from the East feel so alien to an audience used to Western media, why popular Eastern properties are so often remade to suit a Western audience. We can
That was just, if it needed to be remade, then it's not the property. It just needed to tell its story. Because that falls under bad adaptation, in which every storyteller and country can do. And for Americanization, is Americanization a bad thing? Because how much Americanization is good, if any? Like the name change on lights, or or I some. Cause, in Digimon, the main characters technically have their names changed. I mean, they have their, in the beginning they still have their names, but they say the names differently, and they go by more or less a nickname. Well, most of them, anyways, and that's Americanization. But that can also fall under like a continuity change, which then also fall under a bad adaptation. So, is Americanization is just adaptation, or it's it's an interesting thing to bring up, because I wouldn't say Americanize. Maybe I am saying that Americanization is just adaptation. Uh, well, not adaptation. It is adaptation, but I'm trying to say it's overly. Well, then again, I just said is all American adaptation bad adaptation. So yeah, I'm not gonna devolve any further than that. It's a different discussion.
explore and answer to the question, what were they changing in the first place? What's so different about a piece of media from halfway across the world? On the surface, they appear similar. They have heroes, villains, romances, and action like Western works do, but there also lies something exotic about the writing. Then you look at Eastern philosophies that emphasize internal struggles, and you look at the structure of Western religions, like Catholicism, and how one should always be ready for the external threat posed by an eternal adversary. The power of progress versus the respect for tradition, strength of body versus the strength of mind. Then you notice how powerful a role the development of culture and the respective worldviews of the East and West play into the development of a story. How writers write and what the audiences expect to see. Because in the end, from politics to our values to the stories we tell, our cultures and the differences therein broaden the possibilities of creativity beyond one simple guideline, or even the most powerful imagination. And that is a beautiful thing.
Okay. Yeah, I guess all I gotta say is gotta cut about 7 minutes of this, and you have yourself a good video, because the beginning 7 minutes, it's kind of pretty unnecessary. Maybe. Maybe for the sake of exclamation, they need to use a simple exclamation, exclamation. Use a relatively simple exclamation to give the more nuanced and explainable exclamation more ground to stand on. But apart from that, I really didn't have anything bad to say because he does explain himself. Ex- Jesus, I'm not comfortable saying that word. Explain his stuff. Do you agree, King?
Yeah, he really needs to explain himself better.
No, that's
Uh,
not that's not what I said.
oh,
He's
sorry.
he does explain himself, but I'm saying that he could have explained himself better in the beginning 7 minutes.
Yeah, definitely. Because that part was just fluff.
And yeah, I guess to the first video I wanted to look at, if you have the time.
No, it's I don't know, it's dip,
All
and
right.
it's yeah, it's just gonna be a basically repeat of what we just did. So, yeah,
Probably not. I mean, this guy doesn't really get the things too well. Doesn't get things too well.
yeah, true.
At least it's not like triggered or Dritz. All
Yeah,
right.
but still, have a good night.
Good night. Hey, at least I got my B list. That's pretty neat. I just realized. Yeah, good night.